Earlier this week, we brought you the story of how Red Bull were claiming that Aston Martin were cheating. Today, we're going to tell you about another team accusing them of cheating. Christian Horner likes to say that the higher you rise in Formula 1, the sharper the knives get. Aston Martin might be the Julius Caesar of the F1 paddock because every other team is trying to stab them in the back. Let's get you up to date on who is in current contention for most jealous team principal in the paddock. Aston Martin getting on the podium on pure merit in Bahrain has to be one of the biggest development successes in Formula 1 since the start of the hybrid era. Going from 7th to 2nd on the grid would have been unfathomable before the budget caps came in. But now the top teams can't just spend their way to success. Good engineering is king. Mercedes' fall from grace is proof of the flip side of this. Money can't solve bad engineering anymore. Success in Formula 1 still isn't free though. It takes hard work, ingenuity, and a very thick skin. If Lawrence Stroll's reaction to the 2020 investigation into Mercedes selling Aston Martin illegal parts is anything to go by, he is going to need to toughen up real quick. The other team principals are sharpening their knives and are looking for any opportunity to make them bleed. Red Bull took their shot earlier in the week by claiming Aston Martin had copied their car, which we quickly debunked. Now though, an ex-team member with something to prove has stepped up to try and put Aston Martin where they think they belong. Ex-Aston Martin boss Otmar Szafnauer raised the issue in a recent press conference that some teams are exploiting a loophole that helps them to reduce their wage cost over the year. I'll explain how this loophole works first and then tell you what Otmar said and why this goes far further than Aston Martin. They're just catching the flack because the rest of the grid are envious of the progress they've made. We actually reported on Ferrari and Mercedes doing this last season for any long-time viewers watching. When the budget cap came in, the biggest teams had to lay off a large number of staff to stay within it. Remember, those teams voted for the cap and agreed on the amount it was set at, so they knew that was coming. Losing a large number of staff because you can't afford them anymore is terrible for those that lost their jobs, but the teams didn't want to get rid of everyone. The more engineers you have, the more development you can do. Therefore, the more engineers you have, the faster you go. The top teams didn't want to get rid of all their staff, so they had to come up with inventive ways to keep them involved in the team, but not on the payroll, or just not on the payroll full time. So what they did was move staff to other projects while they weren't needed on the F1 team. This meant they could still be paid a full wage, but for half of the year, that wage wasn't included in the budget cap. Instead, it was paid by their pedal bike department in Ferrari's case, or their sailing team in Mercedes' case. I'm serious about that bike thing, by the way. Ferrari actually had F1 engineers developing pedal bikes. The engineers got loaned out to work on all sorts of projects, and then when they were needed back, the Formula 1 team took them in for a few weeks' work and then sent them back to their side projects. This works because an F1 car upgrade gets worked on in stages. You do your theorizing, then your modeling, then your testing, then your wind tunnel work, and then you build it. You don't need all of those teams at work all the time, so you just get them in when you need them. In the past, they would all be working all the time because you could spend as much money as you wanted on as many upgrades as your aero team could imagine. The budget cap put an end to that, so there isn't enough work to keep those teams busy all the time anymore. Instead of paying them to sit around all day, why not get someone else to pay their wages and have them work on other projects? So that's the loophole they're exploiting. In my opinion, it is definitely more of a loophole than cheating. Any team could send their staff off to do other stuff when they aren't working on the F1 car. It is definitely easier for some teams though. And there is another side to this. Some of the projects being worked on by the staff members could have applications in Formula 1. The most obvious example would be McLaren sending team members to work with the Formula E team for a while. Or Ferrari sending staff to help with their latest hypercar project. The things they come up with in those situations could have applications to the Formula 1 car. In fact, if you were really abusing this loophole, you would specifically start a new project that would definitely have applications in Formula 1. Maybe AlphaTauri decided to make a Formula 1 car that can be driven by a normal person and sell them to the public. They could develop tech for that car outside of the budget cap. And then, when those staff came back to the AlphaTauri factory, all that information is in their heads, ready to apply to their F1 projects. This is what Otmar has taken issue with. Some teams have dedicated technology divisions where they apply developments from their F1 program to other industries. Szafnauer is concerned about how any transfer of knowledge back from those divisions to an F1 operation is treated within the cap. If you have a great F1 idea because you're working on something else, how do you account for the stuff that you thought of when you were working on something else? That's just an idea. But if you take that even further, it could be other things. Developing tools, for example, for a boat, but that tool then applies to F1, and you spent loads of investment on developing the tool, and then you largely account for it in F1. That's the kind of stuff we have to start thinking about to stop. A recent example put to SAF now was Aston Martin, who confirmed that their Chief Technical Officer Andrew Green has moved away from his Formula 1 role and over to the technology side of the business. It seems like more and more teams are looking at their well-remunerated employees that way for cost cap reasons, SAF now has said. And we've got to make sure that there comes a time where all these ancillary businesses that are now cropping up, that without a budget cap wouldn't be there. We've got to look at that and make sure that the loopholes aren't big enough to where, effectively, we don't have a cap. Otmar actually went on to admit that Alpine have done this exact thing, sending some of their staff to work on the Alpine A110, which is one of the ugliest cars I've seen in a long time, by the way. So this program obviously goes a long way beyond Aston Martin. I wouldn't be surprised if every team on the grid is using this loophole to some extent. So what can be done about it? Honestly, probably not a lot. You could force F1 teams to have any staff working for their team to be paid a full wage and not allow them to work elsewhere. The problem is that F1 teams bring in consultants and external workers for a variety of roles, so that really doesn't work. You could set a limit to how many staff could be on flexible contracts. Say 80% of your staff have to be full-time employees. That could potentially work, but I don't know enough about the overall contractual state of a Formula 1 team to be able to say. We need someone very senior in human resources to help us work that one out. It is incredibly difficult to police this. You can't just wipe people's memories of the work they've done on other projects each time they step through the front door of the factory. There is always going to be an aspect of this going on in Formula 1. The task for the FIA is to find a way to limit it to a level that doesn't contravene the new budget cap rules. To give you an idea of how bad this is, we've seen reports that Aston Martin has 200 employees that work in the exact same building as the F1 team, but for different companies. That source makes some pretty insane claims, and considering we haven't seen them confirmed anywhere, take that with a big pinch of salt. If this is as big a problem as Otmar seems to think, then this needs looking into seriously by the FIA. On a small scale, it won't have too much of an effect. But if teams have hundreds of employees working for other companies, developing stuff for their team, then the budget cap may as well not exist, because clearly it isn't working. How do you think the FIA should deal with this problem? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. And while you're down there, hit that subscribe button to keep up to date with everything happening in F1. Until next time, drive safe and bye for now.